player Will.
Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. Within this last week, Exdeath was released as part of the Final Fantasy V collaboration, and a unique Vision card was released for him as well that generated some buzz and hype throughout the community, and for all good reasons. We talked about it on the Leoner support a couple weeks ago, and now this video, hopefully, to really drive home some emphasis about how good this card is. And so, this video overall, the long and short of it, yes, this card is a must-pull category for your accounts. The first half of this video is going to be my usual review of it, but I will take some time in the second half of the video to talk through some of the game balance things to answer, is this truly a broken Vision card? They gave 42% magic res pen here, and why not? We'll just segue right into this. So yeah, the party bestowed ability is 42% magic res pen. It's also 16% crit evade, 20% area res, and 24% reaction block rate for Guild War modes, which is the more competitive mode of those available. But it is for 3 classes. It's Greatsword, Sword Warrior, and Staff Black Mage. And so this magic res pen, obviously very beneficial for those Staff Black Mage units. Individually, the stats itself, certainly nice. 3 agility, 17 luck, and a 10% unit resistance bestowed ability for the holder of the Vision card. Honestly, right down the middle, all of these things here are perfectly aligned with things that we look for in what can potentially be main slot Vision cards. And honestly, the groupings that they picked also have some very valuable units, some very meta competitive units, and some great units that are in the permanent pool of the game as well. All of those things really culminate to it just being a great value pull overall. And no doubt, part of the FOMO related to this, which there should be some, is the fact that this is a limited Vision card, and Final Fantasy V is likely not to return, I would guess, for at least a year. I mean, it's kind of inconsistent exactly how often they rerun these, but if you don't get it now, it could be quite some significant time until you do. And so per usual, I always like to look at these from the perspective of the main slot attribute that really determines whether some of these cards should most often be in your main slot or sub-slot, in this case being the area resistance. And for each of these 3 categories, Staff Black Mage and Greatsword, not including this one, they have 3 each. So there's enough to make a team. Sword Warrior actually only has 1. So this is a very valuable addition to the Sword Warrior group that not only gives them a second area res card, but gives them some new overlaps with some new classes where prior they were only relegated to Sword Knight and to Fist, which is a little bit limiting from a team building perspective. But at least Staff Black Mage and Greatsword getting back here, they do share 1 card here. This is the MR rarity card, though. We did get this for free. It does honestly overlap some good classes here with Book and Axe, but this is, statistically speaking, not the strongest card. It's certainly not a bad card, but it's not the strongest card. But realistically, these other ones here, the VV Vision card is part of the Final Fantasy IX collab, is one of the better Vision cards they released, and as is Silver Memories here. So this isn't necessarily that it's the greatest area resistance card you could possibly use for these classes, but again, it is also about the marriage of these new groups where they obviously have completely different class overlaps. Now I do have here as honorable mentions on the bottom some of the AoE wide resistance cards. These are not apples to apples with area res overall, because obviously they apply either to physical or to magical, and even now we've seen slightly less emphasis on the diamond oriented attacks. We're kind of getting back to those smaller AoE shapes, regular cross shape patterns and whatnot. So while these AoE wide cards are still very valuable to keep in the back of your mind, and you should know what's available to the classes, we really are primarily looking at this first overall row. And to me, I do love this card here for really solidifying Greatsword and Staff Black Mage and Sword Warrior, and we'll talk about more why in a second, but my quick thoughts are exactly that point. I think these are classes that already have some well-established synergy if you were to look at the groupings of what exists between the 3 of them. And why not? Let's actually pause and actually do that. What we're looking at here from this matrix, if you will, I have Staff Black Mage. Here in column A is all the Vision cards they have available to them in the game. This is roughly speaking if it's a main slot attribute potential. And then these X's here are whether or not Greatsword or Sword Warrior has cards in common with them. And so when you look at Staff Black Mage and Greatsword, this is a great new AoE resistance card where they only had the Hollow Vessel. This is objectively a much better card for them, but they do technically have 2 agility card overlaps, and they do have a magic AoE wide res overlap, so there is some bones there, and Staff Black Mage does have some good overlap here as well with Sword Warrior. Now, admittedly not in the main slot vision card perspective, so this does absolutely solidify this a little bit closer, but they have enough that the developers obviously tried to set up some kind of synergy with them. And then if we pivot this chart in particular to look at the overlap between Greatsword and Sword Warrior, just completely omitting the Staff Black Mage group, they have an absolute slew of outstanding vision cards, with one of the major ones missing being an AoE resistance card. They obviously have a handful of other unit res options. They have a handful of agility percent based options. They have some wide res options. They have some damage and accuracy related ones here for what you might need for modifiers and other intangibles. So Greatsword and Sword Warrior also has a bunch of great vision card overlap, but is missing that one core fundamental piece that may be able to really align them in the way that we try to build those teams, with the AoE res, unit res, and agility as one of the primary main slot vision card attributes. All right, getting back to the PowerPoint here. The 42% magic res pen is a big power creep step forward, and I am going to spend the second half of this going more into that. This card does still provide good value to Greatsword and Sword Warrior, even not considering the magic res pen, where obviously for those two classes that stat is kind of irrelevant to them. But the crit evade, the area res, and the reaction block rate for Guild War, these are still very compelling main slot attributes to give both of those groups as well. And in particular for the wielder, the bestowed effects of the 3 agility, the 17 luck, and the 10% unit res, certainly a nice thing for any unit to have, even if it's putting this on a card like a support. Like if you went 2 Greatsword units and a Staff Black Mage unit as a support, or even a book wielder that has nothing to do with this. Even if you took Summer Resnick and put her with this card, you give Summer Resnick 3 agility and 10 unit res, it's better than nothing. And so when it comes to making these rainbow teams, these unit bestowed effects are ones that we look for splashing in some of these random units like a support or a tank. Now, when we get to the power creep discussion around the magic res pen, I did a very hodgepodge analysis of this on the Leoner support, but more distinctly here, I did want to kind of compare it to slash res pen, which obviously is one of the resistances in the game that has got further penetrated the longer the game has gone on. And right now, slash penetration does have 4 vision cards in the game. It's got 2 at a 28% penetration level and 2 at a 35% penetration level. Dagger has access to 3 out of those 4. Sword Red Mage has access to 2 out of the 4, and these other ones all have at least 1 that they can pick from. And from a magic res pen perspective, there's only 3 vision cards. 2 of them are at 28%, and one of them is this new one at 42%. They didn't even give the 35% here. They just went full higher at the 42%, and Glove does have 2 of them. Technically, Glove has access to these 2 at 28%. But now for the first time, Staff Black Mage is getting access to 1 of them. So in my eyes, this is kind of keeping Staff Black Mage competitive with what Glove and Staff Devout has access to for Magic Res Pen. So from that angle, this isn't like an egregious new stat that they're handing out. They're basically catching up Staff Black Mage to its magical counterparts. Now, if you look at all the units post the Water Veritas, which to me is kind of like the start of the new era of what they had intended for power creep, average units have 20% slash res and 16% magic res, which based off that innate stat, you might conclude that it does look heavy-handed to give 42% penetration, when on average magic res isn't as high as slash res, so you don't really need the much higher penetration. But there's a lot more factors that go into this than just the innate unit resistance. If you look more at, like, let's say game balance related things, and looking specifically at job vision cards, magic resistance, and only on job cards, not the mono element, magic resistance is on 13 different job based vision cards. Slash res is only on 10. And if you were to kind of like bucket them in terms of, like, you know, you have hollow vision cards and hollow vision cards, 8 out of the 13 magic resistance cards are hollows, and only 4 out of the 10 of the slash ones are hollows. So there is kind of more like a power creep emphasis of newer vision cards that have skewed on the magic res stats. So magic resistance is more prevalent on a lot of the more modern vision cards than the slash resistance. But even then, the Espers, I made a very generic rank of the most often used Espers at the top end of the game, and more of them have access to magic resistance than they do slash resistance. And even the ones that do have access to slash resistance, I can guarantee you, if you ask any top end builder here, you are almost never using the slash resistance nodes here, but you are quite often using the magic resistance nodes. And part of that is because there simply isn't enough magic resistance penetration in the game that this is still a valuable stat to have, the magic resistance. And not for nothing, a lot of these espers, when you kind of like min-max their trees, like what you can pick for attributes, the ones that have the slash resistance, this is unfortunately like one of the last attributes you want to pick. So on average, the best espers being equipped do skew a lot heavier on the magic resistance. So not only do you have more vision cards that are magic res oriented and more espers that are magic res oriented, but this next slide is going to look like a doozy. I promise it's going to be a lot of numbers, but hang out with me, guys. What we're looking at here, I decided, and this is super high level, I wanted to look at all of the new units in the last year and look at what their average penetration was for this damage type. And there's basically 3 different charts here. This very top left one is the Staff Black Mage units, which this card applies to. The one right below it is the other magic users, so Glove, Staff Devout, Ace. And the one on the right here is basically all slash type units. So it's Greatsword, it's Dagger, it's all the classes, all of them. And what I basically wanted to look at was like, what's the average penetration of these units for this damage type? Now, this isn't an incomplete analysis. I'm not trying to go that deep because I'm not including things like area resistance penetration, unit resistance penetration, imperils, all of those kinds of things, which do have very important talking points in the conversation of the damage formula. But one of the things that I noticed with Staff Black Mage in particular is that on average, they are typically capped out around 40% penetration, and even a unit like Exdeath, his is only on an ability. And for the other magic users, non-Staff Black Mage, they are also on average around that 40 level, some higher, some lower. The glove units skew a little bit lower, but if you recall, the glove units have 2 cards to get more penetration. But when you compare all of that to the slash penetrators, yeah, there's a couple here that on average are at like 40% innately, but there's a lot of them that are in that 70 to 80 to 90% to 100% penetration range. And again, this is not including vision cards, it's not including equipment. This is literally innately in their kit, what they have as units alone. But the general takeaway for me is that while sure, there may be not as high potency levels of slash res pen on the vision cards, the units themselves skew on average much higher on what their penetration levels can be than the magic units do. And so to answer the question, like, is 42% magic res pen broken? No, it's not broken. It's actually adequate to keep up the Staff Black Mage group, not only with the other magic units, which as we saw, they already have vision cards that allow for penetration, but even the slash counterparts, when we're comparing a similar kind of damage mitigation, they're finally catching up with the sword units in total. That being said though, just because 42% magic res pen isn't broken doesn't mean that this vision card isn't broken. Because it absolutely is. This is definitely in a must-pull category. That 42% alone, while is adequate for what the class needs, when you combine that with the fact that it's got area resistance, crit evade, reaction block rate for Guild War, some valuable agility points, and luck, and the unit res on the unit bestowed. In addition to the fact that it aligns these 3 classes in a way they have not been able to before. This is a huge step forward. And just to quantify that damage for the Staff Black Mage, on average, I took 3 different thresholds of like magic resistance. If you're fighting an enemy with 20 magic resistance, this is only going to be about a 10% damage increase. If you're fighting an enemy with 40% magic resistance, this is going to be a 21% damage increase. And if you get even higher, if you're fighting an enemy with 60%, this is going to be a 37% damage increase for that unit. That is a huge power creep influence. The other thing too, just generally speaking, is that when you look at Sword Warrior, this is a valuable second card for them where they really don't have any others except for the Cypher card, which was limited to a year ago, and Final Fantasy VIII has already had its second rerun. I wouldn't imagine that it's going to get rerun again for quite some time. And so while Sword Warrior may not be the strongest overall class individually, as we showed, Sword Warrior does have some great crossover with Greatsword. And so if you have a unit like Cypher, if those of you really like using Ramza, and who knows, next week in JP we could have a new Sword Warrior coming out. You'd have no idea. This card absolutely enables that group with Greatsword in a way that it literally can't at the moment. And although individually the stats of this vision card aren't necessarily broken, having it all in one absolutely puts it in a different tier. So that's everything I wanted to cover today. I know it's a little bit more complex than normal, but I wanted to emphasize just how important of a pull this is, not only for units like the Greatsword and Sword Warrior, but the Staff Black Mage in particular. I know so many people have Shreka. Even if you're not pulling Exdeath, having it for Shreka alone is a great addition for her. This is a great vision card for those of you that maybe weren't around for the Final Fantasy IX collaboration, where the Vivi vision card for Staff Black Mage was like the best card, and it has some similarities in the fact that it has AoE res and magic percent on it. In all honesty, that Vivi vision card is now likely going to go to the sub slot so that this can go in the main slot. But if you don't have that VV Vision card at all, now you finally have one for that Staff Black Mage unit that you're going to absolutely notice the performance of your Shreka, and most definitely the performance of your Exdeath if that's also a unit that you were trying to pull. But that's everything for now. Per usual, comments, critiques, criticisms, anything you want in the comment section below. Love to hear your thoughts, and good luck pulling for those of you that are, those of you that should. But thanks for watching, and I'll talk to y'all soon.